Humanizing environmentalism. The two core concepts in trying to negotiate how we appreciate environmental ethics are need and greed. And where do we go to find our ethical compass around this? Often we go to this great soul, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, who hailed from the country that is a friendly neighbor to the land where I'm originally from. I'm from Pakistan, and yet I'm a great admirer of Gandhi because Gandhi really transcended boundaries in terms of his vision for planetary citizenship. And now, after having applauded him for that, I'm actually going to deconstruct this quotation. So much as we feel compelled by this quotation, that in fact there's some kind of dichotomy between need and greed, that human beings are too much taken in by that allure of greed, and that we are perhaps not focusing on our biological impulses and needs as much as we should, I would submit to you that there is an intrinsic connection between need and greed, which modern environmentalism will have to embrace if we are to deal with the most challenging issues of development in our world. So let's think about some of these caricatures that we see in modern environmentalism. Here's a cartoon which many of you might actually sympathize with, right? It's trying to present this notion of clarity that is so much pushed by modern environmentalism. We are destroying the earth. What do you need to know more? What evidence do you need? There is a tremendous impatience when you hear environmentalists talk about these issues. And I sympathize with them. I have many students who have a tremendous vision and energy to grapple with these problems. But then if you look at the right side of the cartoon, you have this caricature of institutions that are perhaps trying to grapple with complexity, and they are often presented as villains, right, in one form or another. And they may well be, in some areas, villainy in them. But what I would submit to you is the real reason why we are seeing this happen is because we are still in that mindset where we do not want to wrestle with those connections between need and greed. Here's an example from Gandhi's own land of origin, India, where there has been tremendous concern about natural resource development. We've got a major problem in terms of inequality in India, and that is in essence the biggest challenge that we face globally, which humankind has not been able to fully embrace in terms of dealing with social welfare concerns, is how do we deal with inequality, right? And this cartoon is reflective of that. You've got a mining company, in this case named Vedanta, and you see the cartoon there saying, well, you've got all these people coming in and they're saying, we'll provide you jobs and we'll give you all these other incentives, and you should just let us develop. And the environmentalists are saying, you know, this is essentially greenwash, right? And that word, by the way, has made its way into the Oxford English Dictionary. And so it is a term as such, which epitomizes this challenge we have, that anytime we try to find some negotiation between polarized perspectives on the environment, you are relegated to a world of cynicism, where you are considered as, you know, gullible pawns in some larger corporate scheme, and that you have been manipulated and co-opted, and your minds have been polluted as well, right? And so what we end up with is a status quo. We end up with institutional paralysis. And until we are able to make that connection between need and greed in a more deliberative, in a more ethical way, absolutely, we must not forget the ethical norms, and sometimes ethics may require regulations on which they are predicated. But we cannot at the same time divorce need and greed. We will come up with these same caricatures. So what have I been trying to do? I've been trying in my work to suggest that in fact there is a connection between human desires and development. And I have tried to do that from the lens of minerals, which I consider to be the ultimate resource. Even for food, you need minerals. And I must betray my pedigree as a chemist originally, where I would say that elementally, we are, in fact, dependent on the periodic table. And I wish there was one here. I always find a room without a periodic table to be somewhat vacuous. But the reason is that ultimately that is what we are going down to, right? And in some of my recent work, such as this, I've tried to ask this question. Would the world be a better place if we somehow curbed our desire for material goods? And most of my students would say, duh, yeah, of course, we're environmental studies majors. Wouldn't you say we should be consuming less and we should have less material goods? And each time I open my drawer, I feel terribly guilty. Why do I have all this stuff? And damn the dollar stores and all these other people who are trying to shower us with materials. There is tremendous anxiety. Anytime I talk to my students about this, and I can sympathize with it. And there is reason at times to be concerned about it. But it is simplistic if you just then disparage it, any kind of connection to human impulses for wants, because you are not willing to deal with that complexity. And I would submit to you that is what is the way out of this problem of development that we are encountering. So how did we get here? Well, 10,000 years ago, human societies decided that they had found ways by which they could move beyond subsistence, and we settled down in agricultural systems and we started to develop our societies beyond subsistence. Now, environmentalism has still had a very strong anchorage in subsistence. We often try to move away from it, but we keep getting pulled towards it. Most recently by the film Avatar, right? And you see this image. This is an image taken from a theater in Quito, Ecuador, where you can see that the audience is a group of Amazonian Indians who are watching the film Avatar, sponsored by Coca-Cola. I should mention, you can see the sponsorship quite emblazoned there. And so you would ask yourself, these are people who are really grappling with these challenges. How do we move away from subsistence and we enter a market economy? And you should ask yourselves, why did we move towards a market economy, right? And one of the key reasons is because subsistence, only on its own, without hybridity, subsistence is an extremely selfish form of existence, because you are only concerned about yourself and your family, right? You are not likely to be investing your time, which is ultimately the most precious resource you have, in developing human society. The only way we were able to develop was once we settled down after the Neolithic revolution, that 10,000 year ago time period which I mentioned. But we still have that romanticization which has been most recently popularized by Avatar, right? So that is the real challenge. First, understanding our environmental studies students and professionals need to first appreciate why we needed to move away from subsistence. That doesn't mean we don't have a connection to the land. I would want my children to know that potatoes don't grow on trees, yes. But at the same time, I realized that without hybridity, without that connection to larger society, without that connection to livelihoods, we will never get that conundrum of development resolved. So then let's think about how can we achieve that hybridity? We can think about some aspects of private enterprise clearly playing a role, but we also need to think about ownership of resources in other more novel ways. We need to think about trusts. We need to think about the connection between the local and the global. We cannot afford to just hunker down and be local because of that inequality that exists globally, because of all those other challenges which have been presented to you just moments ago as well. And then finally, the third question then is, what is our responsibility for that innovation? Each of us, and that innovation does not have to be just technical innovation. Sadly, whenever we use the term innovation, and especially in the context of TED, because it's technology being the first operative oftentimes that people think of the acronym as, we think of just technical innovation. We're talking about social innovation as well. That is a responsibility. If we are going to grapple with a world which will have 9 billion people by 2050, right? There is no other way around it. So let's take an example. we've got an example of the element gold. Remember, I'm predicating it on minerals as being the ultimate resource. And gold is an element which often people associate with human wants, not with human needs. It's often thought of as a superfluous metal. People have often disparaged your consumption of gold. But think about it. What has happened to the world's gold reserves? The world's gold reserves have changed dramatically in the last 200 years. Most of the world's gold is now above ground. But what happened? All the human agency which went into moving that gold from below ground to above ground. Who are the people who benefited? How are those benefits now distributed? There is a story of tremendous toil and suffering around that. Most of that gold came from places like South Africa, where we had, of course, a legacy of tremendous suffering, right? But at the same time, let us not delude ourselves into thinking that now that South Africa is a country which is by far the most developed in Africa, it would not have been so had it not been for that impulse of greed being connected to some other form of human activity which allowed for that to happen, right? You could use the same example of other element, carbon, not coal, that's the bad carbon. How about diamonds? Is that the good carbon? Maybe not. Well, perhaps it is. If you think about Botswana, they'll tell you it's the good carbon, right? Here is a country which provides free healthcare for its entire population. Yes, they have major problems with HIV infection, but they do provide free antiretroviral drugs. How could they do it? It's because some starry-eyed teenager wants to get a diamond ring for their loved one in Tokyo or New York. No other reason really, right? So if you didn't connect that greed to the need, Botswana would probably still be very much impoverished, because before diamonds were found, their big business was beef and cattle, and that wasn't taking them anywhere really. So you have to think about what happened. They wanted to develop an ecotourism sector. Where would they get their capital from, right? So that's the way to think about it. The same way if we're thinking along this gradient of where those materials went, where are they now, and then we can think about the service sectors which can be developed now that we have these materials above ground, and that's where the cyclical economy will have to start kicking in. That's where we bring in the industrial ecology paradigm that many of you may be familiar with as well. Livelihoods are the key in this regard. And this is, often people simplistically say jobs versus the environment. I would put, instead of jobs, I'd say livelihoods, which are fulfilling in that larger quest for development. And if we think about the challenges that face us, look at the situation still with global child labor. We still have about 250 million children who are engaged in child labor, which is something often most of us think of as repugnant. But what do? We have a situation where environmentalists have started to focus so much on consumption. They don't want to deal with population issues as much for various factors, which many of our other speakers are very eminently qualified to comment on as well. And so what do? The only way we can get around this is then through the question of livelihoods, right? And livelihoods have changed tremendously over the past several years. So if you think about human development, in 1790, almost 80% of the economy in the United States was agriculture and extractives. Look at where we are now. We've got almost 70% is service sector in some form or another, right? And why did that happen? Well, it happened partly because of that innovation, the value added, which is essential for development to occur, but partly also because of individual choice. It's easier to be a professor at a university than to be a farmer. Let's face it, right? And there is a reason why people end up in those situations. It's easier to be, in many cases, writing and engaging in some other form of activity that does not require that for many people. And there is you can have psychological studies which will tell you that too. So what do we do if people want to do that? They want to move in that. The only way we can work around that is through innovation, right? So here's my solution to how we might try to work through some of these issues. This is a diagram which I've tried to put together to synthesize this complex argument. And I know it's very difficult in many times for these kinds of public presentations for people to grapple with complexity. And you will find a lot of people who tell you, look, you need to have a simple diagram. You know, you need to be linear. And I had one of the reviewers for one of my recent works said, you know, I really like what this guy is saying, but his argument is a bit meandering. And I said, you know what? Rivers are meandering. Rivers, have you ever seen a straight river? Thank you. I'm really, and you know, I'm sorry if I don't sound like Malcolm Gladwell. I'm sorry if I don't sound like Thomas Friedman. I'm sorry, but the reality is, I don't have a golden arches theory for you. I'm going to present to you complexity. That's the way the world is. That's the way natural systems work. That's the way social systems work. And so this is about as simple I could get, okay? but there's more than meets the eye to this. So need and greed. Why do I have an octagon? I have an octagon because the number 8 is very interesting. You know, even for chemists, those of you who are chemists in there, the octet rule, there's something magical about the number 8. Feng Shui, you know, you see Feng Shui diagrams always have an octagon also. So there's some imagery in there, and I quite haven't figured it out myself, but there's something about 8, right? So that's why I've got those octagons there. I've got a triangle at the top, which is one of informed choice. Now, this is a real challenge, you know, when we're dealing with a lot of these issues. People are concerned about how much do we give individuals choice. And this is the tension between sort of totalitarian systems and pluralistic systems. What we do realize is informed choice is going to make for a much better connection to innovation. And we have the empirical evidence for that, right? When you have choice, you get more innovation. So that's why it's important. Now, the challenge for environmentalists is when you do have informed choice, you often get suboptimality. The Nobel laureate Amartya Sen told us about 40 years ago in a paper which very few students read these days. It's called The Impossibility of a Paretian Liberal. Paretian meaning Pareto optimality. You know, remember the guns and butter and the Pareto optimality diagrams from some of your early microeconomics coursework. Well, what Amartya Sen said is it's impossible if you want a liberal society beyond a very small population set, essentially more than 2, where you would have a liberal society and an optimal society. It's not going to work out because you will always have, and he mathematically showed why it would be impossible, right? So first of all, that's very difficult for environmentalists to accept because they always gravitate towards optimality. And you cannot get optimality if you want a pluralistic society. And that's why often environmentalists gravitate towards totalitarian societies. And I've seen this happen time and again. I have many environmentalist friends who will romanticize Cuba or romanticize China. And I understand why they might do it. Because there's this feeling, they snap their fingers and they get the job done, you know, damn it. These Indians, this is constantly the argument, that India-China conundrum. So what I'd say is the only way we can get around it is to make these connections between the treasure impulse, informed choice, need and greed, and we must never forget that this is our ultimate base. So I'll leave you finally with this coda, which comes from the work of Brian Norton. And basically he's suggesting that the truth is out there, but the truth is really something which we all have to grapple with if we try to consider renewability in this cyclical industrial ecological system. Thank you.